I, Elias Vance, knew the moment I set foot in the historic Greenwoode Library that this winter was going to be long. Up on the Maine coast, the early December air bites deep into the bone. My job was to digitize the century-old archives of this vast Gothic-style library. The librarian told me, "You'll be the only person in the building this winter, Elias. The library is yours at night." Her voice was calm, but I saw a strange, deep weariness in her eyes. My living quarters were on the upper floor, but my workspace was deep in the basement, in an area called Archive C. The staircase leading down was all stone and iron. The air down there was damp, thick with the heavy scent of old paper and dust. Row upon row of iron shelving held thousands of files, boxes, and books bound in crumbling leather. The first day was spent just setting up my equipment. It was nearly midnight. The silence in the basement was so profound that the sound of my own breathing seemed deafening. I was looking for the scanner's power cord on the floor. I bent down, fumbling in the near darkness, and just as I plugged the cord into the socket and straightened up, bang! Right next to my ear, a heavy, thick book suddenly and violently flew off a high shelf and smashed onto the stone floor with a deafening thud. My whole body jolted. I cried out like I'd been electrocuted. My heart hammered against my ribs, convinced it was about to burst through my chest. The noise was so sharp and loud, it felt as if the glass windows upstairs had rattled. I stood there, trembling, looking around. There was no draft, no vibration, no logical reason for the book to have moved. It had fallen from an iron shelf, bolted firmly to the wall. I tried to rationalize it. It's an old shelf. Maybe a tiny shift made it fall. But my mind refused to accept the excuse. The book lay open, its yellowed pages staring up at me accusingly. I didn't work much that night, but starting the next day, the cold began. Despite the roaring boiler, the temperature in Archive C dropped to an unnatural level. Whenever I started working, the faint, indistinct whispering would begin. At first, I thought it was the wind outside, or the old pipes rattling, but the sound was too close, like many voices speaking simultaneously right next to me, yet their words were utterly unintelligible. I was scanning an old public health record from 1880 Greenwoode. Whenever I handled a particularly significant document, the whispering seemed to intensify. One evening, my scanner abruptly shut down by itself. As I focused on the machine, I caught a glimpse of a shadow, tall and distorted at the edge of the doorway. The moment I turned my head fully, it vanished. I forced myself to believe it was just fatigue and an illusion, but my skin was crawling. I knew I wasn't alone. It was around this time I found an unmarked wooden crate. Inside, among some personal items, was a leather-bound diary with a rusted iron clasp. It belonged to the librarian of the 1890s, Silas Thorne. His handwriting was frantic, but his account was terrifying. Silas wrote about the unseen presence he felt within the walls. He wrote, "This entity is not history itself, but history's scars. All the terrible things this town desperately tried to forget. It only whispers of our forgotten sins." Turning the pages, I realized Silas believed the entity was sustained by memory. If those memories were kept imprisoned within the pages of the physical books, the entity remained confined as well. He issued a chilling warning. "I fear what would happen if someone brought these records to light. If they were exposed, if a copy was made digitally, the entity would find a path to escape. Let the memories sleep inside the book. To awaken them is to free it."
My scanner was that modern light. I was in the process of giving that forgotten history permanent digital memory, inadvertently setting the entity free from its centuries-old prison. My fear escalated to a fever pitch. The whispering was no longer faint. One night, I clearly heard a distorted voice speak my name. Elias. Elias. The sound came from right behind me, yet there was nothing but shelves of silent books.
Silas's diary had mentioned specific books that were the original documents of Greenwood's darkest tragedies. I understood that the book that had smashed to the floor on my first night was part of that collection. These books were the entity's shackles. Trembling, I approached the old wooden cabinet where Silas had last hidden these forbidden books. My hands shook. As soon as I reached for the cabinet door, the lights short-circuited. The single bulb in the basement flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. In the dark, the whispering swelled into a chorus of hundreds of voices. Their sheer rage was palpable. I felt as if I wasn't just surrounded by books, but by the entity itself. I realized that it wasn't a ghost of the building. It was the collective, psychic force of Greenwood's forgotten tragedies. The light sputtered back on. I found the last entry in Silas's diary. It was a final, desperate command. There is now only one way. To keep the entity trapped, these crucial books, the archives of sorrow, must be destroyed. Burn them. Let the history be forgotten. It is the only way. I stood before the cabinet. In my hand, Silas's diary. Before me, the scanner, ready to grant digital immortality. I faced an impossible choice: destroy history to trap the evil, or save the history and unleash the entity. I made my decision. I did not scan another document that night. I gathered the crucial boxes, Silas's diary and the books of tragedy, and sealed them up. I left them there in the icy darkness of the basement, just as Silas had. I did not destroy the history, but I left it locked inside its own prison. The next morning, I packed up and drove away from Greenwood without looking back. I took no records, no scanned files with me. However, as I was deleting some useless sound clips from my phone during the drive, I heard it, faintly, under the static, in the whispering. My name. Did I truly free the entity? Or is it now with me in a digital file, in a new form? I don't know, and I will never, ever return to Archive C to find out. It has been nearly a month since I left Greenwood. I was back in my small apartment, hundreds of miles away, where my life was supposed to return to normal. But the safety and comfort of home offered me no peace. I didn't sleep. I just lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The strange, unnatural cold of Archive C felt like it was permanently embedded beneath my skin. I had practically stopped using my phone. I knew something lingered there. That single audio recording I took from Greenwood, the one where the whispering contained my name, I couldn't bring myself to delete it. Every time I tried, the phone would heat up alarmingly, or the screen would flash with random, nonsensical characters. But the real psychological torment began when I was forced to open my laptop. I had a research paper deadline. As I started working late one night, the whispering began again. But this time, it came from my laptop's speakers. It wasn't a sudden loud sound. It was an extremely low murmur, a collective humming of many voices. It persisted even when I muted the volume completely. The sound wasn't coming through the speakers. It felt like it was emanating from the metal body of the laptop itself. I noticed that the corrupted sound file from my phone was now on my laptop as well. I was certain I had never transferred it, but there it was. Worse, my old photographs, the folders containing my family albums, stopped opening. The file names were all corrupted, filled with random letters and numbers. One day, I managed to open a photograph of my sister. The image appeared, but over her face was a black stain. It looked like as if a cold, damp finger had wiped across the memory. Right beneath it, a new, unseen folder had appeared, labeled Forgotten 2025.txt. I realized the entity was no longer confined to the library. It was contaminating my digital life. It feeds on memory, and digital files are permanent memory. I hadn't freed it completely in the archives, but one simple recording had allowed it to follow me home.
Overwhelmed, I resumed my research on Silas Thorne. The irony was painful. I was using digital tools to try and understand a digital haunting. I scoured old databases, finding an unpublished note from Silas. He wrote that the entity's goal wasn't just to exist in memory, but to use that memory to isolate others. "I am becoming alone," he wrote. "The city's memories refuse to leave me. No one listens to me anymore. They wish to forget me. The entity wants all of us to forget we were ever human." I felt the chilling truth of his words. I had begun to isolate myself. I stopped answering my friends' calls, terrified that the whispering might pass through my phone and reach them. After extensive searching, I finally found an archived digital newspaper from a state far away from Greenwoode. The headline, dated 1892, "Greenwoode Librarian's Tragic Accident, Mysterious Fire." The article stated that Silas Thorne died while attempting to burn records in the library basement. A small fire had broken out, but strangely, the report noted that a specific section of the basement, Archive C, was untouched by the flames. Only there, the pile of books meant for burning lay completely intact. I was stunned. Silas had failed at the last moment, and those intact books were the ones I had locked away. I hadn't destroyed them, but I hadn't freed them either. I had merely left them in Silas's intended trap. Just then, my laptop screen, which had been flickering, suddenly went dark, then instantly displayed the contents of that unseen folder, Forgotten 2025.txt. There was no text inside, only a single image. It was a picture of me as a child, my old smiling face. But over my mouth was that black, wet stain. And below the image, a caption, "You have forgotten."
My phone suddenly rang. It was my mother's number. I answered, but there was no voice, only the whispering, which this time seemed to mimic my mother's tone before erupting into distorted laughter. The entity had invaded my relationships, my most treasured memories. I didn't wait any longer. I realized I could not risk unleashing this entity into the vastness of the internet. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was solid. I smashed the laptop onto the floor. The screen shattered. Then my phone. I destroyed it too, breaking its battery, its chip, everything, severing all digital connection. Now I am alone, isolated. I have no internet, no phone, no digital memory.
I had destroyed every digital connection in my apartment. My phone, my laptop, all relics of a terrifying past. I was now trying to live a completely analog life. I read books during the day and embraced the silence at night. But I knew the entity had been freed.
and it was still around me. My fear took on a new form. The whispering was no longer confined to speakers. It was now part of the very air. When I touched the antenna of a closed radio, the speakers would emit a soft static, and within that static was the familiar hum of 1,000 voices. I tried to turn on an old black and white television. Amidst the screen's snowy static, I saw fleeting, dark shapes. I realized the entity was not merely digital. It contaminated any medium of communication, anything that carried memory. By isolating myself, I had only shrunk its hunting ground. I had not defeated it. I felt compelled to look beyond Silas Thorne's failed attempt to burn the archives. I couldn't use digital means, so I decided to mail a handwritten letter to the librarian back in Greenwood. I asked her directly, did Silas ever find a solution other than destruction? A few days later, a reply arrived in a handwritten, old-fashioned envelope. The letter itself was brief, but she had enclosed a hidden note from Silas. Dear Elias Vance, we all wished to forget, but your question reminds me of Silas Thorne's last personal note, not his documented one. Silas believed fire was not the answer. Fire destroys, but it also releases. What he sought was slumber. Go look. Not fire, not peace, only the shackle. Underneath the text was a simple hand-drawn symbol, a circle with 3 dots at its center. I understood. Silas didn't want to destroy the books. He wanted to put them to sleep in such a way that the entity could no longer draw power from them. I had to return to Greenwood. This time, I carried no scanner, only the librarian's note and a simple flashlight. My journey back to Greenwood felt like a pilgrimage. The town was colder than before, as if all warmth had been utterly drained from life. Entering the library door, I was hit by that familiar, damp, cold scent. It was late. I descended the basement stairs with my flashlight. As I entered Archive C, the light beam flickered. The atmosphere was unbearable, frigid to the core. The whispering was no longer subtle. It assaulted me, the air itself screaming in 1,000 muffled voices. I went straight to the wooden cabinet. I didn't need to pick the lock, as I had left it unlocked when I fled. I opened Silas's diary. I searched for that last page where I had only seen the panic and the talk of destruction. But this time my eyes were drawn to the small symbol in the corner, the one the librarian had sent me. I pulled the books of tragedy onto the table and took out my pencil. I began to draw that symbol on the inside cover of the first book. The moment I finished drawing the symbol on the first book, a great, shuddering breath seemed to travel through the archives. The iron shelves around me groaned and rattled. The other books on the table began to vibrate. My hand was shaking, but I continued. The entity launched its final resistance. The air rushed out of the book stacks toward me like 1,000 strong winds. I felt as if I were being crushed under the weight of centuries of condensed, suppressed memory. I could hear the whispering screaming, "Do not forget me! Where will I go if you forget?" For the first time, I realized the entity, though malevolent, was the tragic embodiment of forgotten people of Greenwood. Their fear, their pain. They didn't want release. They wanted recognition, and I was putting them back to sleep. I finished drawing the symbol on the last book. The instant the pencil mark was complete, a profound, heavy silence fell over the archive. The whispering stopped. The cold remained, but the intense, living malice was gone. I placed the books back into the cabinet. I was certain now. They were merely dormant memories, shackled. I left the library.
The town no longer chased me with its silence or its cold. I had won. I had not destroyed history, nor had I released it. I had merely given it slumber. Returning to my apartment, I finally slept soundly. The next morning, I picked up the librarian's note, the one with Silas's clue